Welcome to Long Body Prayers. I'm Shante, and today we will be talking about Aphanipoiesis and animism. This is from a recording of a workshop presented at Goddard Graduate Institute. So this is Nora Bateson, and I discovered her work a couple months ago. She's the way that she looks at systems has this simplicity and rootedness about it that I really love. And it's given me this kind of linking point for all of these different worlds. There's like a meta frame that she puts around the act of perception and being in a system that I've found really helpful. And she's kind of intriguing also that her father, Gregory Bateson, was one of the founding people in the systems thinking world. And her grandfather, William, was I think he actually coined the term genetics. So there's this interesting lineage thing happening where at least 3 generations of this family have been in this inquiry around what it means to be part of a living system. And I can feel that in her work. I can feel this sense of something that's longer than just her lifetime. Which for a white body, a European lineage body, there aren't a lot of spaces where I feel like I have access to that within my own lineages. And so Nora actually feels like a little bit of a glimpse into like what would like cultural transmission look like within my ancestral context. So one of the big questions that she's working with is, how does a living system change, and where does the new come from? And she looks at, this sense of emergence, which is often talked about within systems discourse or transformation discourse, and says like emergence is the sprout. It's kind of the fruiting body, but there's this whole layering under the surface that happens before emergence happens. So in her recent work, what she's been exploring, and this is the quote which begins our residency, is this unseen realm that is vital, non-trivial, and sacred, and real. And below the organism's current capacity to perceive. The flexibility that lurks below conscious perception is like the soil beneath the forest, teeming with relational processes. And it's really bringing into question, like for this seed to sprout into a tree, it's not just about the seed, it's about the soil, it's about the water, it's about the minerals. There's this whole realm of context, which she calls the transcontextual, that contributes to this emergence. And so often when in dominant culture people are addressing issues, they're addressing just that part that's above the surface, just like with, in the medical system, the symptoms are often addressed. And so she talks about the issues are formed upstream of the emergence, in the earlier overlapping and combining of unexpected and subtle experiences. And so the thing about this transcontextual space is that there's not a single cause to anything. What you can't really see in that picture, but what would be representative of a living system, is that the roots of that tree connect with the other roots of the other trees and the other plants. and they're also connected with the animals who eat the plants and the water cycle. And so there's this sense that life, the process of life, happens across and within bodies. And that every body is part of this fractal system of wider and smaller bodies. So if I have I have an allergy to mold that's been really impactful in my life right now, that causes like symptoms like fatigue and headaches. And part of what's happening with that is inside my body with my liver, my gallbladder. And part of what's happening that is the mold. And part of what's happening with that are the building practices from 30 years ago, which created houses that are more sealed, that allowed the mold to grow. And the pesticide practices, where fungicides became more used. And so mold started to put out more mycotoxins that were toxic to humans in ways they hadn't been in the past. So that change happens across and within bodies, across and within spaces, and across and within time. And so part of the complexity that we are in today is that this colonial, capitalist, monoculture system has happened across such a span of time that the things that the system is shaped around adapting to are things that we're not even aware of anymore. So Nora noticed that within English and within systems discourse, there's a word for what happens under the surface, the combination of circumstances over time that have produced danger, and that word is insidious. And so something like colonization, which is a shaping factor of the structure, the like overculture that we're living in today, it has all these transcontextual threads to it that over time have created this insidious outcome. And one important concept, which she doesn't talk about directly, but is informed in my work by the work of Tara Hozumi, Der Sohe, and Larissa Kahl, and also Resmaa Menakem talks about this sense of the culture as a body. So when Nora talks about an organism, the organism can also be a culture. So she talks about the organism is always shaping new experience through a transcontextual combination of the experiences that have come before. And for the lens that I'm looking at and my practice, what I find interesting is that one of the shaping places of colonization is really within nervous systems. This idea within clinical nervous system discourse of the window of tolerance, the way that human bodies within colonization do their lives is shaped by this pattern where we often will it's in this like getting things done, moving, pushing through energy that then kind of collapses into this tuning out, watching Netflix, trying to soothe, but misses this middle layer, which is that nuanced felt sense and that embodied presence where play lives, where rest lives. So Nora had this question, which brought her to the essay that this workshop is about exploring, of what are those submergent qualities that aren't towards danger but are towards vitality. And so this took her to the creation of a new word, because there wasn't a word for it in the English language. So she created the word Aphanipoiesis, which means the unseen coalescence towards vitality. And then it's bringing together the words Aphani, they're both Greek, which is obscured, unseen, or unnoticed, and poiesis, which means to bring forth or to make. And she talks about it as the coalescing of many experiences that may once have been perceivable. And I find this interesting. She also says older cultures have held the unseen to be relevant, because it's not directly stated in her work, but I have the sense that she's referencing this perception frame of colonization, which narrows the sense of what's possible. And so my practice and the other research I have been doing is around this sense of animism as normative consciousness. And I think that's really what she's referencing when she talks about the experiences that may once have been perceivable and the unseen being relevant. So there's this beautiful podcast called The Emerald, and there's an episode that's titled Animism as Normative Consciousness. And Joshua, the host, describes that for 98% of human history, 99.9% of our ancestors lived, breathed, and interacted with a world they saw and felt to be animate. And that just, it reshapes my whole sense of ancestry when I hear that, and when I really take that into my body, that the majority of my ancestors, almost all of all human ancestors, lived within animist consciousness. And then this last 10,000 years or so has had this perception shift that's taken place in Europe, and then has spread. And Robin Wall Kimmerer talks about this too. Robin Wall Kimmerer is Anishinaabe. She's a scientist. She talks about this in her book Braiding Sweetgrass also, but this is from an essay called Learning the Grammar of Animacy. She says, science is a beautiful language, revealing the intricate mechanisms of the world. But beneath the richness of its vocabulary, its descriptive power, something feels missing. The same something that swells around you and in you when you listen to the world. My first taste of the missing language was the word papui on my tongue. I stumbled upon it in a book by Anishinaabe ethnobotanist Kiwe Denokwe, a treatise on the traditional uses of fungi by our people. Papui, she explained, translates as the force which causes mushrooms to push up from the earth overnight. As a biologist, I was stunned that such a word existed. In all its technical vocabulary, Western science has no such term, no words to hold this mystery. You'd think that biologists of all people would have words for life. But I think in scientific language, our terminology is used to define the boundaries of our knowing. That which lies beyond our grasp remains unnamed. In the 3 syllables, I could see an entire process of close observation in the damp morning woods, of the mystery of their coming, the formulation of a theory for which English has no equivalent. The makers of this word understood a world of being, full of unseen energies which animate the world. And I think that speaks with incredible eloquence to what Nora is also trying to reference, this sense that colonized humans are in a cultural structure that limits the possibilities of what can be seen. And so my own practice and my thesis work has been around these questions. Why did these ways of perceiving, these animist ways of perceiving, become unseen for people who have been touched by colonization? How is my European lineage kin's invisibilizing of animacy an adaptive reaction to ancestral trauma? And how can my kin reweave relationship to animist sensing? So Nora talks about Aphanipoiesis, this unseen, underneath subterranean process, as happening through abductive process. And in this essay about Aphanipoiesis, she goes into two different ways of looking at abductive process. And the first way is as hypothesis. So she references this scholar Pierce as abduction is the process of forming an explanatory hypothesis and is the only logical operation which introduces a new idea. And that hypothesis, it's like the story of the world or the cosmology. The thing about it is just like this window of tolerance that our nervous systems have. It shapes what's possible. It shapes what's possible to perceive it without getting activated or dissociating. And it's based on this sense of humans or any living system as an anticipatory system. So this sense that we are shaping our new experience through what has come before. And that what has come before, it's teaching us how we're learning to be in our worlds. And this is such a helpful question. This is a question Nora uses a lot in work around warm data and systems thinking. Is so helpful in terms of looking at any problem in the world not as somebody is doing something wrong is happening, something has to be fixed, but how is what's happening an adaptive response to this coalescing of contexts? And so that I'm tracing in my work the way that adaptive trauma reactions can calcify into a culture in which only certain things are perceivable, and that narrowing of perception is itself a trauma adaptation. So I have a lot of curiosity about that. And the complexity and for our culture the tragedy of this anticipatory system is that there's no way to know within a model that the system it was encoded from has changed. And that goes back to this sense of transcontextual process happening across time. So the roots that started to connect to other roots, that started to grow the thing that emerges, aren't necessarily going to notice what those first contexts were. Not that there really is a first, but whatever that convergence was that led to the adaptive responses that are now shaping perception. And so this, again, this thing of the shaping and the narrowing, so Nora talks about communication not as what has been said, but what it is possible to say. And I find this, like, of everything that's this question of what is it possible to say feels so important. Like, I feel it in every room that I step into, in terms of how I'm able to move my body in this space. You know, can I talk about my experiences with trees? If I feel an impulse to sing or to drum or to lay on the floor, can I do that? You know, am I going to be excluded? Are people going to think I'm crazy if I do that? And so this sense that reality is guarded by these implicit messages that are inherent in relationships. And that the way that the aesthetics, the tone, the felt sense of our relationships, it shapes everything. it produces this felt spectrum that holds the limits of what can be communicated. And I think that is one of the biggest difficulties about change, about healing trauma, if such a thing as healing, could even happen, is this limiting of what is possible, the shapes of expression that are possible. So the research questions this brings up for me are what keeps us out of ceremony, what holds us out of that felt sensing of animacy. How is that shaped by what's possible to say? And on a nervous system level, you can see this through the way that most everything in dominant culture is there's a certain flatness and decontextualizing that happens. Information is kept in isolated silos. Human bodies are this idea of isolation. We become dissociated. Colonized people become dissociated even from this felt sense of body. And within relationship, there's this sense of this human-to-human bubble, which becomes about, like, do I trust this other person? Do they like me? Did I say something wrong? Am I going to be excluded? Am I an outcast? Which narrows the possibilities of support just within this human realm and takes us out of this sense of being able to feel the earth, to feel the ancestors, to feel all these other beings that could be contributing to the communication. And that within a nervous system state of support, perception, relationship has this thickness to it. There are more possibilities for embodied expression. There's an ability to be in curiosity, even about things that are harmful. Even about things that are threatening, there could still be this curiosity about how is it learning to be in its world, like where is the relationship, and this ability to be in present moment responsiveness, all of which it actually creates the conditions for metabolizing trauma and not just trying to push it away. So all of that kind of that sense of the flatness becomes a way of denying this webbing of context that we're in. So something like when I say the word ritual, what I mean by that word, the images, the sense of the word that comes with it for me will probably be totally different than it is for you. Or when I hold this water, my relationship to this water, the watershed it came from, the fact I have to go to the grocery store to get it, and it's reverse osmosis water because I can't drink the tap water here, like all those different threads. It's not just the thing and nothing more. It comes with this webbing of relationships. I have to plug in my computer. And so the way that I've been talking about that relational webbing in my own work is this idea of the long body, which comes from the Haudenosaunee people, as a word to describe relationships. And again, just that pattern within colonization of creating so much dissociation between humans and what sustains us. This sense that it's allowed this globalizing to happen. It's allowed this rapid expansion beyond the bounds of what an ecosystem can support to happen, because there's this dissociation. And so what Nora talks about in her essay is advocating for this process of retissuing the gaps. And a tiny gesture toward healing implicit, destructive relational habits is much more practical than 100 attempted explicit action plans that result in caustic erosion of more relational connective tissue. That all those places where the relationships have been dissociated from, all those places where we don't recognize aliveness, animacy, agency, those places need to be remembered back into relationship. And so there are these two forms of abductive process. One is hypotheses. The other, her father Gregory Bateson talks about as multiple description. This sense that one context becomes a description of another context. So you see this in conceptual metaphor, like the ways in which this culture perceives bodies as machines, healing as war, nature as commodity. I'm noticing that I'm starting to get tired of talking. Just noticing how many words it's been. That abductive process can be found through poetry, through art, embodied expression, nature connection, divination, ritual, and ceremony. And that animism itself is abductive process. So there was a conversation recently between Nora and my two main teachers, Dara Sohei and Larissa Call, at their organization Animist Arts. And in that conversation they lifted up this phrase, the flexibility we don't know we need yet. There's this other concept, stochastic process, that kind of comes from that abductive process, like as these unexpected insights and these shiftings in perception. And that just the basic, it's really just this simple way that beings relate and communicate, through this resonance that happens as they sit side by side and talk to each other. And I see this like within, there's this sense that in that dissociation the relationships have stopped noticing each other, and the beings in the relationships have stopped noticing each other. And so allowing them to be seen and allowing them to start to talk to each other means the system starts to shift and learn.